There are many different ways of writing. You choose mainly to write prose because you are a biographer, but for this, you've written in poetry. Why?
Well, I do write in poetry quite a lot, but nobody sees it. I mean, what people see is my prose, so it's not so much a choice of now I'm going to do one or what now, you know, and the people don't see what I've done in poetry. But I've never been a much published poet, so it's just something that stays within doors, and my prose goes out and about quite a bit.
So what is it that a poem does for you that a prose book can't? Speaking as a writer.
An awful lot, because I mean I haven't been able to stop writing poetry, although I've had no encouragement to do it, and there's no rationale about it. I mean, it's something that I wanted to do a long time ago, but there are certain things that occur to one, there are certain emotions, there are certain kind of combinations of even literary sort of activity, mental activity, that demand a poem rather than something else. So I don't have any policy about, you know, I'm going to write this or I'm going to write that, but quite frequently there's something that comes along that has to be a poem. I mean, it just couldn't be anything else, because it's usually, it's got a sort of potent vaporousness, you know, that wouldn't be suitable to writing prose.
And you spoke earlier about rhythm. Sometimes it's the rhythm that comes first.
Yes.
Can you talk about that in this particular poem, The Mighty Hudson?
Well, I do get kind of enamoured of certain, as many people do, you know, any sort of literary people, of certain phrases and words and combinations of phrases and words, and often there's a rhythm in speech or in something somebody says or something you think that just has a sort of compelling quality to it, and it really, quite often I get carried along that way through the sense of a long line. I was reading, I was stuck in an emergency room waiting room for about 4 hours last week, and I took Thomas Hardy with me because Hardy is formally so various, and he has that feeling of being pushed into poems by a desire to write in a certain form. He hardly ever writes in the same form twice, but he's got this really interesting kind of rhythmic compulsion, and it's something I'm very sympathetic to, you know, that you can sort of get this almost the sound of the pattern of a poem, whether it's regular or irregular. You get it kind of in your head first, and then somehow that forms a structure. I mean, sometimes it actually dictates the poem in a strange and I hope not sinister way.
What about, do you ever introduce yourself as a poet?
Never. Never.
Why not?
Because I've only published 4, so I think it would be mildly ludicrous to introduce myself as that. It took me years to put the word writer on my passport forms, because I thought it was a bit pretentious and a bit, you know, I thought, well, at what point, how many books do you have to publish before you can call yourself a writer? And obviously you can publish no books and call yourself a writer, but I didn't feel that I could do that, and I still would. I mean, the P word for me is just a zone of awe, and I would be, I'm just amazed to see myself described as that anywhere, like in the forward book, but it just seems like a sort of hopelessly...
At some stage this evening, will you say, because I did not know that you had only written 4, so at some stage will you say...
Yes, published 4, I've written
I've only
yes.
had 4 poems published, because
yes.
I think we can confuse publication with authorship. We
Absolutely.
can say, oh, they're a very prolific poet, but actually a lot of what they write may not be poetry, it may just be words, poems.
Yes, because it's really interesting. I mean, Nessie Dunsmuir, W.S. Graham's wife, you know, when after she died, he published a book called The 12 Poems of Nessie Dunsmuir, which was partly a W.S. Grahamish exercise in quirkiness and how to present poems. But there were only 12 poems that she'd liked or that she'd written, and so it was just a book that only had 12 poems in. You know, it didn't attempt to be a particular size, because a slim volume also dictates a certain, even its slimness is a cliche in terms of publishing length. So, you know, why not have an absolutely massive volume of verse or a tiny one, or it really shouldn't be dependent on sort of publishing norms. And I mean, I've published 4, I've submitted about 7 in my life, and 4 of them have been published, but I've only ever published ones I felt really happy with.
Do you think words that announce themselves as a poem claim a higher status than words that just...
Yes, I do, because I've thought about poetry all my adult life, and I'm kind of obsessed with it. And if you kind of get into that zone, I'm very happy to be in that zone, whether I'm thinking about it, reading other people's poems, writing... You see, a lot of my poems that are kind of just tinkered with, it's just so glorious not being published, because you can sort of keep faffing around and you can keep enjoying it and keep weighing up whether there's something that could be improved, or what is it that you're trying to improve. I mean, why are you doing it? What's going on? But it's something that's like a sort of deep recreation mentally. I mean, I just love it.
It's a great cliche. People are always saying, there's a novel in everybody. I think that might be wrong, but I think almost certainly there's a poem, even if it's only one, even if it's not very long. Something that is to some degree essential.
Yes.
But that may be too solemn.
Yes. No, it's the most forgiving and the most demanding thing to write, I think, a poem. Because it can, as you say, it can be sort of anything, in a way. And it doesn't have to be read by anybody else. It can just be purely for yourself. But it can also be something that you would, really spend a lifetime trying to get right and be extremely proud of when you do get it right.
Claire, thank you.
Thank you.